Hei og riktig hjertelig velkommen til nok en ny episode i podcasten Uttafor, men Innafor, i regi av Parkinson-foreningen Oslo og Akershus. Programledere som vanlig, Serilin Erlandsen og Edgar Voldmanis.
Hei Edgar, dette er Serilin.
Og hei Serilin, dette er Edgar.
God aften.
Jo, noe sånt er det vel blitt også.
Ja, vi skal jo spille inn på et litt uvanlig tidspunkt. Vi pleier å møtes om morgenen, men hvorfor møtes vi klokken 3 i dag?
Fordi at vi i dag har en spesiell gjest. Det er Dr.Ray Dorsey. Han er en av de 4 forfatterne av boken Ending Parkinson's Disease.
Oi, har vi fått utenlandsgjest igjen?
Ja, det har vi.
Herremann, from the United States of America.
Riktig.
Uniten,
rett og slett. Han holder faktisk til i Rochester, som er en liten by nesten oppe ved kanadiske grensen og de store sjøene. Men det ble morsomt å høre da, hvordan han har det der, og hva som gjorde at denne boken kom i gang.
Det
og
blir
de 4 forfatterne, og vi har en god del ganske skarpe spørsmål til ham. Ja,
og jeg ser at du har forberedt deg godt, så jeg tenker at du tar av deg mesteparten av intervjuet. Men til lytterne så kan vi jo si sånn at hvis du ikke forstår alt på engelsk, og hvis det blir litt tungt, så kommer meg og deg til å kjøre en oppsummering etterpå på norsk.
Det gjør vi.
Så stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Det kan være at oppsummeringen rent praktisk for den som lytter kommer neste uke. Eller vi prøver å klemme ned i dagens episode.
Ja, men da er det jo bare ekstra spennende for lytterne å se hva som skjer da.
Ikke sant? Never a dull moment.
Skal vi bare ringe nå?
Da ringer vi opp, vet du. We have called up Dr. Ray Dorsey from the University of Rochester. Hello, Ray. How are you?
Very good, Edgar and Sarah Lynn. Thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. To jump straight in, you are one of the 4 authors of the book Ending Parkinson's Disease. Could you start out by doing some 60 seconds plus about yourself and why the interest in Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a neurologist. I'm a professor of neurology at the University of Rochester. Both my parents are psychiatrists, so I like to say I rebelled and I became a neurologist. And then during residency, you try to find an area that resonates with you. And then I remember I spent time at the University of Pennsylvania with Dr. Matt Stern and Dr. Howard Hurdig and Andrew Sidoroff, caring for people with Parkinson's disease. And I really liked it. And I said, I could do this. I like the people who were affected. I like the fact that you can make them better. And I like the fact that you didn't get called at 2:00 in the morning. So that's how I got into movement disorders and Parkinson's disease.
Right. 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, well, when you're a resident, you used to, carry around a pager and you got beeped at all different points in time. And I had 3 young children at the time. Now my wife and I have 4 sons. And that was enough waking up for me.
I do understand.
How many years have you worked as a doctor, and how many of these focused on Parkinson?
Almost all on movement disorders. I finished all my training in 2007, so about 15 years ago. The first 10 years of my academic life was really focused on a rare genetic disease called Huntington's disease, which also has involuntary movements. With it, I had an outstanding mentor, Ira Schulson, who's made huge contributions to that field and Parkinson's. And then I had the gift of a sabbatical after serving in a leadership capacity in the Huntington's disease community. And I really started investigating the environmental causes of Parkinson's disease and reading the great work of Dr. Caroline Tanner at University of California, San Francisco, and really came to the conclusion that Parkinson's disease, I think, is to a large extent a man-made disease and thus a preventable one.
Right. Man-made.
Yeah, so every society creates its own diseases, and there are a couple of great examples of that. One is lung cancer. So in the United States and likely in Norway 100 years ago, lung cancer just didn't exist. There were almost no deaths due to lung cancer in the United States 100 years ago. It was so rare that when a doctor saw someone with made that diagnosis, he'd gather around all the medical students and doctors thinking it was a, quote, once-in-a-lifetime oddity. Unfortunately, that didn't stay the case. And about 25 years after cigarettes were introduced into the United States in the early 1900s, into England a little bit before then, you see a rise in the rates of lung cancer deaths. When smoking peaked in the 60s and 70s and started to fall, 25 years later, you saw a corresponding decrease in the number of lung cancer deaths. Today, lung cancer, which didn't exist 100 years ago, is the leading source of cancer death, both in the United States and around the world. And we could live in a world where lung cancer is extraordinarily rare if we stopped smoking. And I think the same thing's true for Parkinson's disease. When Dr. James Parkinson described Parkinson's disease in 1817 in London, he's 61 years old. He's been a surgeon for 30 plus years. His father was a physician. He's been around the block. And he said, he described cases of 6 people with a new condition, a condition that he said had not been classified in the medical literature. And if you think about London 1817, what's going on there is we have the Industrial Revolution. London's the capital, and air pollution was at unprecedented levels and had been for 50 to 100 years, if not more than that. And so I think Dr. Parkinson's describing the sequelae of long-term exposure to high toxic levels of air pollution.
And that links directly to
Parkinson's disease. So numerous studies. I think people are, I'm in upstate New York across the lake from Canada, and we've been experiencing the air pollution from the Canadian wildfires. And it turned out that New York City had air pollution that was so toxic, it mirrored, it was among the most polluted cities in the world. So on the par with like Delhi and Beijing, and it had air pollution levels at the level that 1800 London was. So when you saw the sky was orange in New York City in June, that's exactly what were the skies in London when Dr. Parkinson's describing his new condition. And as many of your listeners know, there's increasing evidence linking air pollution to Parkinson's disease and air pollution especially to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And so I think these are major factors. Now, the good news is that places like Norway, places like Western Europe, air pollution peaked 50 years ago, and you've seen a dramatic cleaning of the air in Western Europe over the last 50 years. And with that decrease in cleaning of the air, I think we're seeing signs of flattening of the rates of Parkinson's disease in Western Europe, and even from a study done in the Netherlands, perhaps a decline in the number of new cases of Parkinson's disease when you adjust for age.
But in the book, which has been out for 3-4 years now?
It came out March 17, 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Not a good time to release a book.
I thought it was a terrific time since everyone was sitting indoors, not going nowhere, and not having anything to do. It would be a fantastic, you could write a book about anything. Yeah,
it's a fantastic time to read a book, but getting people aware of a new book is a little bit more challenging.
You missed out on all the book signings.
Yes, there were no book signings.
But in that book, you say that there will be a doubling of cases leading up to 2040.
Yeah, so Parkinson's disease is the world's fastest growing brain disease. And if you look at the rates of Parkinson's disease, they're highest in the industrialized world, like the United States and Canada. They're lowest in the least industrialized parts of the world, like sub-Saharan Africa. And they're growing most rapidly in those countries undergoing the most rapid industrialization, such as India and China. And then one of the major risk factors for Parkinson's disease is aging. Just like you don't smoke a cigarette and get lung cancer the next day. You don't get exposed to pesticides, dry cleaning chemicals, and air pollution and develop Parkinson's disease the next day. You need to live a long period of time for the disease to unfold. We know it takes decades likely for Parkinson's disease to become manifest. And so as the number of people live longer, as more and more people live into their 50s, 60s, and 70s, we're going to get more and more people with Parkinson's disease. But this is all changeable. We can all change the trajectory of it. If we clean up our air, if we clean up our food, if we get rid of dry cleaning chemicals, some of which have been causing cancer for 100 years, we can create a world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare instead of increasingly common.
Right. That's interesting. If we actually do these things, if we do now getting active in cleaning the air and other parts of the environment, then we may not see that doubling of cases by 1940, or it will flatten out. And
yes, exactly. It's not a fait accompli. We can change it. And indeed, if you look at the only high quality study that I've seen that showed that the number of new cases of Parkinson's disease adjusted for age is decreasing is in the Netherlands, so not too far from where you are. The Rotterdam study is called. And between 1990 and 2010, the number of new cases of Parkinson's disease adjusted for age decreased by 60%. 60%. Crazy, right? And so I said, well, let me look back and let me look at air pollution, dropped by at least 50%, if not much more, in the decades before the decline. Let me look at pesticides, level of pesticides in the fat. So, you can measure pesticide levels in the fat like DDT and its metabolites. Dropped between 75 and 90% between 1968 and 1984. And then let me look at this dry cleaning chemical, trichloroethylene is its name, TCE. And the Netherlands in 1981 had among the lowest levels of TCE in its atmosphere and its outdoor air of any country in Europe. So when the Netherlands made changes to their environment, they saw a decrease in the rates of Parkinson's disease. And I don't think there's any reason why we can't do that in Norway, why we can't do that in Canada, and why we can't do that in the United States.
But you mentioned air pollution, but do you think that's something on the ground, like where the houses are built, the pollution in the ground?
So I think there are two factors for air pollution. I think there's the outdoor air pollution, like what you see in the sky. And to give you a flavor of like how messed up the world is, in China, when kids color the sky, they color the sky brown, not blue. So we should not forget that the sky is supposed to be blue, bright blue, crystal blue. And if it's not, that's because we're doing something to it. And when we do something to our outdoor air, we're going to pay a really high price for it. Life expectancy, worldwide life expectancy for all of us is on average 3 years shorter because of outdoor air pollution. So if you want to live a short and unhealthy life, breathe a polluted air. Now, in addition to outdoor air pollution, there's indoor air pollution, like within your home, your school, within your workplace. And it turns out that this dry cleaning chemical, I think most people know that radon can evaporate from the soil and enter people's homes, especially your basement. I don't know if people test their homes for radon in Norway. They might.
Yeah, they do.
And it turns out there are other chemicals that can evaporate from the soil. And one of them is this dry cleaning chemical, trichloroethylene, which can contaminate groundwater, which is, about, you guys do meters, which is, 5 to 10 meters below the ground, and it forms underground rivers. And that TCE is very volatile. That's why it's used in dry cleaning, because it readily evaporates. And it can evaporate from the soil and groundwater and enter cracks or foundations or utility lines in your home, school, and workplaces. And if you live near a military, an industrial site, a dry cleaner, you could be breathing in this chemical and never know about it. Or you could have breathed it in 50 years ago and never known about it. And this chemical is known to cause cancer and is associated with a 500% increased risk of Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
Right. Where did the idea of the book come from? And who said these are the 4 guys that should write it?
So Boss Bloom and I had the pleasure of giving a talk on the bicentennial of Dr. James Parkinson's description of the disease in 2017 in New York City. And we gave a talk, and we were talking about the rapid growth and the number of people with Parkinson's disease. So we wrote an editorial to JAMA Neurology that was initially entitled The Parkinson Epidemic. And then Michael Oken was the editor, and he said, why don't you call it the Parkinson Pandemic, which is a term that he had actually used in one of his books earlier. So we wrote this piece on the Parkinson Pandemic, which talked about this doubling. And it really resonated with the Parkinson's community and with our peers. And we said, well, if that did it, why don't we write a book? And so we enlisted the support of Todd Scher, who I think was at that New York City meeting. And that's how the four of us came to be. I would say one of the inspirations for the book, and even if you look back at that paper called The Parkinson Pandemic, it was influenced by a book I read, How to Survive a Plague by David France. And David France was in New York City in the 1980s when a new disease was emerging. That disease was uniformly and rapidly fatal, was caused by a virus that no one had ever seen before. And there was very limited response by public health regulators, both in the United States and quite frankly around the world. And a group of activists, including David France, formed an organization called ACT UP in New York City. And their motto was silence equals death, because for people with HIV and AIDS, silence did equal death. If they remained silent, there was no one coming to save them. There was no cavalry, and we would say in the United States. And they realized that the cavalry was them. And they changed the course of HIV by barricading themselves in the streets of New York, by overtaking the FDA, by overtaking pharmaceutical companies, by changing the way we conduct research, by giving patients, individuals with the disease, a much greater voice in the development of drugs, by changing our views on risk tolerance for people, and by raising funds and by becoming really politically active. I don't know if you remember, they created a quilt that covered the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and changed our views on HIV in a really short period of time. They were formed in 1987, ACT UP. 1981 were the first reports of what became AIDS. 1987 was the formation of ACT UP. By 1996, I think, we had protease inhibitors, which allowed people with HIV to live near normal, live lives with near normal life expectancy. And if you think about it today, HIV is both treatable and preventable, right? It's preventable and treatable. And how many of us don't have, Sarah Lynn was just nodding her head, people like Sarah Lynn and me, live in a world that we don't have, or much less likely to get HIV because of their heroism. Mm-hmm. And the number of people with HIV is actually decreasing. I mean, no one thought that would be the case. And it's quite possible in our lifetime that HIV could disappear as a clinical entity. And that's all because a group of people, ordinary people marginalized on the fringes of society with very little social capital, made their voices heard and changed the course of a disease. And if these individuals can do it for HIV, why can't we do the same thing for Parkinson's disease?
So we should all act up. Be loud, it says somewhere in the book.
Yes. Very loud.
Very loud.
But when you walk, I guess you don't either live in an environment without pollution and just like nature. And are you afraid for your children? Are you afraid for yourself getting a disease because of the pollution?
I get pissed off. I'm not happy with Canada. Listen, the Canadians weren't happy with Americans when we caused acid rain to follow on them. Why aren't we taxing polluters? Why do we view this as acceptable? Why are we letting private industry, in this case it's forest fires, why are we letting private industry privatize the gain and socialize the losses? Why are we dealing with the consequences of air pollution? Why are we paying for the prices of dry cleaning chemicals? Why are we paying for the prices of pesticides? The people who are doing the pollution should be paying the price for this. If I had Parkinson's, I'd be pissed off. I'm pissed off as it is. I don't have Parkinson's disease. So yes, we should not be allowing people to privatize the gain and socialize the losses. We should make sure that people who are responsible for the pollution are taxed and appropriately penalized for their actions. This is like basic, maybe Econ 201. This is an externality. People are creating a negative externality. And people with Parkinson's disease, 1.2 million in the United States, probably around 10 million worldwide, are paying the price for these polluters. And I think people need to make their voices heard and act up, as Edgar said, and make sure that this stops, or the minimum that people pay the price for it.
Yeah.
But do you do anything active for yourself or your family instead of you do a lot? Great.
Yeah. So,
but do you walk around with masks, or do you say no to your children to go different places to prevent getting any disease?
Yeah. So I used to think that the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the food we eat were safe. I no longer believe that. I'm showing Sarah Lynn a picture here in a second. So there's some very easy things. So I buy organic now. Now, obviously, I'm in a position I can afford to, but I buy organic. I wash all my produce with water and a pesticide wash, basically soap. I put a water filter on my water, so I decrease my exposure to chemicals. My parents, they live in Southern California, where air quality is not very good, and my kids got their grandparents air filters for their home. So I do that, and then air quality was really bad in Rochester, New York, just a few weeks ago, and I biked to work every day, and one day I was biking with an N95 mask. I never thought that I would be, this is what I usually wear. If you look closely, I'm wearing a Parkinson's t-shirt.
Yes, you do.
So I almost always bike with a Parkinson's t-shirt, including today. And I'm wearing an N95 mask. I never thought in my entire life that I'd be wearing a mask to protect myself from air pollution. But I don't want the seeds of Parkinson's disease. I don't want the seeds of Alzheimer's disease. I've seen enough of both those diseases to know I don't want anything to do with them.
So the best pictures are on radio. So we're just going to describe the listeners. So there's Ray on a bike with a Parkinson t-shirt and a green mask biking around. So you do active choices. Yeah, but that could be an inspiring to us.
And if you have Parkinson's, if I had Parkinson's, I'd be even more concerned, right? Because I've lost 60% of my nerve cells. So I would be interested in slowing the rate of progression. One way to slow the rate of progression, I think, is to stop getting ongoing exposure to these things.
Yes.
So I would be fanatical about pesticides. We have a lot of dandelions. Is that what they're called in Norway? You know, those yellow flowers? We have a lot of dandelions.
Yeah.
In my yard, because we don't spray pesticides in our yard. And I wish my neighbors didn't spray pesticides. And I don't hang out on golf courses where there are lots of pesticides being sprayed. So I think there are hundreds of things that people can do individually to reduce their exposure to these environmental toxicants, especially air pollution, certain pesticides, and these dry cleaning chemicals. I don't get my clothes dry cleaned at a company that uses these chemicals that are linked to Parkinson's disease. There are tons and tons.
Can you actually ask about that? If you ask the lady at the there's usually a lady in Norway at the counter, you hand over your...
Yes, I do. So I'll give you a story. So it turns out that these dry cleaning chemicals, trichloroethylene and perchloroethylene, widely used in dry cleaners. And if you look in the United States, you mentioned New York City has high rises, right? Big apartment buildings. And if you look at the ground floor of apartment buildings, they would often have a dry cleaner, right? Because you come out, you drop off your suit or your dress to get dry cleaned while you went to go work. As you can imagine, those chemicals are in the dry cleaner. In addition, they find those chemicals in the indoor air of apartments above the dry cleaner. And in Germany, they look at the butter and the margarine in supermarkets that are near dry cleaners. And because these chemicals dissolve in fat, they find trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene in the butter and margarine and cheese in supermarkets that are near a dry cleaner.
The butter isn't even opened yet.
No, it's not even opened yet.
It's sealed, and still they get inside.
And they still get inside.
Yeah.
If you bring your kid in with it, I'm sorry, go ahead, Edgar.
You go over to the dry cleaners with your suit and you say, by the way, do you use trichlor? And she says, what?
They'll know. It turned out I used to live in Philadelphia, and we lived in a high rise that had a dry cleaner on the ground floor. And so I got concerned about this. So I called them up and I said, did you guys use these chemicals? And they said, we used the chemicals, but we didn't do the dry cleaning on site. It was just a storefront. They did the dry cleaning off site, which I was like thankful. But now there's in the United States, they have a green leaf for dry cleaners that don't use these chemicals.
Oh, all right. So they do actually.
So they advertise and they know. I think people in the industry know that these aren't very good, healthy chemicals.
Thank God it's too expensive to go to dry cleaning in Norway. So we do everything ourselves.
Yes, that's a wise move because, you know, we're paying a really high price just to make sure our clothes don't shrink. So
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
You work with doctors and researchers globally. Where do you find the most acceptance of your ideas? Which country has come the farthest? You mentioned Netherlands. Are they sort of leading the pack now?
So I'll answer in a different way. The people who, two groups that receive this information the best, one are patients, because they go, I did work with this degreasing chemical. I did drink well water when I was a child and grew up on a farm. And I think most people can look back once they're informed and say, you know, I was exposed to these things. And I think most people, you know, 85% of people with Parkinson's don't have a family history of the disease. 85% of people with Parkinson's don't have an identifiable genetic risk factor. And most people want to know why they have a disease. And I don't think it's an act of God. I think this is something that largely men have created. And to the extent it's a man-made disease, this is preventable. The second group that gets this, and maybe I'm wrong, the second group that gets this are the young. Because to them, the fact that the environment would cause disease is, you know, entirely consistent with their view and their thinking on matters. It's really just scientists, you know, my peers, you know, our community is much more oriented toward genetics and looking for genetic causes to diseases. But if you think about it, you know, genetic causes are really important for rare diseases, but if they were really important for common diseases like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, these diseases would likely not exist. They would have been screened out by now. So I think it resonates with the community, this message that Parkinson's is likely, for the vast majority of it, a man-made disease. And then I think it also resonates with the youth.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. So you can't point at one country and say the government there has...
I think some Western European nations, you know, they've seen this, they've done it. But I think it's less a function of geography. I mean, even China has plans to create cleaner air. I mean, they know the harmful effects of it. I mean, it's so crazy in China about air pollution that some schools are creating domes. They build domes over the school so the kids can go play soccer or play outside without getting exposed to the air pollution. So the Chinese, and they adopted like a government plan to improve air quality. So anyone who's experienced the toxic effects know about it. And, you know, if you're part of a society, you can't avoid it. You know, even though I'm a doctor, I can't avoid air pollution. If the Canadians have wildfires that are coming, including the skies of Rochester, I can't avoid it. Or I can only do it, you know, drastic measures for short periods of time. All of us are affected by these factors.
Yeah, and your theory is quite spot on my parents, because we don't have any history of any disease in Alzheimer or Parkinson, but they both died young of Alzheimer and Parkinson, atypical Parkinson with dementia. And they lived 10 years in a house where we saw later that the ground they were living on was polluted.
What was it polluted with? Do you know?
I don't remember, and I don't even remember in English, but it was not a good, but it was earlier an industrial area, which built like 40 houses in 2010. Yeah. So it was a new house area.
Yeah. And so there are tons and tons of communities. In the United States, this whole idea about chemicals evaporating, coming into the homes started at an idyllic community near Niagara Falls called Love Canal. And it was polluted by a chemical company. And these chemicals were seeping up into people's basements and bubbling up, percolating, and causing cancer and, you know, likely longer term diseases like Parkinson's disease.
Mm.
A bit lighter topic. We experience that lots of people with Parkinson's hide their diagnosis from families, friends, etc. Why should they stop hiding and rather come out, in your opinion?
I think they should do whatever they think is most appropriate to them. And I think that's an individual decision. In the book, we highlight the case of a woman who hid the diagnosis from her own children. And it actually increased this caregiver strain on her husband and increased the strain likely on her as well, and likely on the family. But that said, I think individuals can make their own decisions. The flip side is we should have enormous respect for people who are the face of the disease. So people like you, Edgar, people like Larry Gifford, people like Michael J. Fox, people like Brian Grant, people like Davis Finney, who are willing to put themselves out there. It's really, really hard to have Parkinson's disease. It's really, really hard to have a disease and be the face of that disease. And just like as we saw with HIV activists who shared their diagnosis, right, and risk ostracization, and in some cases were, disowned from their families for coming out. It's a big burden to do that, and we should have enormous thanks and respect for people like Michael J. Fox, like you, Edgar, who share their disease. Because think about how much stigma Michael J. Fox has reduced from having Parkinson's disease, because he shared it. One of the most popular people in the world gets a disease and he shares it publicly, and he's been the face of it for 30 years. We should applaud those individuals. He's made a huge change in the way Parkinson's disease is viewed. His foundation's raised $1.5 billion, but I think we've largely failed him as a research community. Over the last 20 years, the number of people with Parkinson's disease has doubled. We've had no major therapeutic breakthroughs for the disease. The vast majority of people with Parkinson's disease don't see a Parkinson's specialist. I think it's time for the research community, for the scientific community, to take a good hard look at why we failed people like Michael J. Fox.
Right. We met at the World Parkinson Congress in Barcelona back in July. What did you think about the event?
Well, I think it was my first event. Eli Pollard, who does a fantastic job organizing it and should be also applauded for her heroic efforts. It was great to see so many people and see so many people from the Parkinson's community. But I think people need to make their voices heard a lot more. I didn't see an edge there. I didn't say, here are the 3 things that we're going to do in the next 5 years to change the course of the disease. Here's the gift we're going to give to future generations, a world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare, and this is how we're going to do it. We live in a world where polio is almost a non-entity. We live in a world where HIV, as we discussed, is preventable and treatable. We live in a world where drinking and driving is socially unacceptable. Those are all gifts we've inherited from previous generations. And just with gifts, you have an obligation to receive, and then you have an obligation to reciprocate. And so in addition to seeking better treatments for the disease and better ways of receiving care and delivering care, we need to think about what gift we're going to give to future generations, and what we're going to give, hopefully, a world where Parkinson's disease isn't doubling every 25 years, but maybe where Parkinson's disease is halving every 25 years. And we need to think, what are the steps that we're going to do and put upon ourselves so that future generations don't have to bear the burden of this terrible disease.
Excellent. We will jump to a second segment of our episode. In Norway, we always have a quiz, because we call it Train the Brain. And
so now you're getting a quiz.
I know, that's what I was afraid of. That's why I was gulping my water. But
and the Swedish Sara Rigare, whom you probably know.
Yes. So why don't we call out her for sharing her story? And I think she's one of the very few people I know that's got a doctoral degree. Dr. Rigare has a doctoral degree earned after she got Parkinson's disease. So I think it's just realizing that Parkinson's disease is not the end of someone's life. In some cases, it might only just be the beginning, or at a minimum, a new chapter in someone's life. We've seen that with Michael J. Fox. We've seen that with Dr. Rigare.
Yeah. And she actually got 5 out of 5.
Are you making me pressure her now?
Yes.
And no, you can't do that. Poor man, poor Ray.
We have 5 easy questions. First one is, you live in upstate New York. This is the which largest state in the United States?
What's the
Ranked by
largest state?
size.
By size? The largest state in the
Yeah.
United States by size is Alaska.
Yeah, no, but New York is which number on the list?
Oh, which number is New York State on the list of most
New York State.
largest states? Wow, that's a good one.
What do you leave in it?
I would guess somewhere around 11 or something.
Uh-oh. According to my checking earlier today, it was number 30.
30? Oh my gosh, I forgot those Western states.
Yeah.
Those Western states are really
Those are so easy to forget.
Yeah. But you said the largest is Alaska, which is the smallest state out of the 50.
It's Rhode Island.
So you got that one right.
Yes.
Not so bad. And the US in itself is which rank on size of countries?
The United States, how big is it as a country in terms
Yes,
of geography?
which rank is it? If
It's either, let me think about this. I think it's either third or fourth.
It is either third or fourth.
So let me see if I can get it. So
Which
China,
are
Russia, I'll go third.
and then you said which is number 1 and 2?
Probably Russia and China, or Russia and then Russia. I don't know, but I think we're
correct.
third. Russia and China, is that right?
Not quite exactly. It's Russia, Canada,
Oh,
a
Canada.
neighbor up there.
And then,
China, and then the US is in fourth place.
Oh, it's in fourth place.
The one you always dread in other competitions as well, you know, because no one remembers number 4. People can easily name number 6 and 7 and 11 and whatnot, and then you say, so who was just behind the top 3? That must be number 4. Yeah, no one remembers. A funny one I stumbled across is normally you inaugurate your new president in January, right?
Yes.
But roughly 100 years ago, you inaugurated one around this date.
March 4th.
No,
Oh,
it was in August, actually.
oh no, I know we definitely did it March 4th because that's my birthday.
Right.
So I know now. Maybe I don't remember August. So
100 years ago.
I don't know why we've been doing it in August. So the reason it is, so we have our elections in November, and back in the old days, it took a long time to get from wherever you were located, say Ohio, to Washington D.C. You didn't hop on an airplane; you had to hop on a train or something. And so it took long periods for people to get there and to get their get the new administration in place. And as transportation improved, we shortened the time period between the election and the inauguration. Now, August, I don't know about August.
But now that we're going back to non-pollution environment, we have to go back to the trains again. The March is perfect.
So August, I don't remember August as an inauguration for the U.S., but you might be right, but I don't remember this.
Actually, according to the list I saw, Calvin Coolidge was inaugurated on 2nd of August, exactly 100 years ago in 1923.
All right, I'm looking this up. That's
Calvin Coolidge.
But wasn't he, but he may have been, wasn't he a vice president? Yes, because he was a vice president because President Harding had died the evening before. So he was actually, the United States, if the president dies, John F. Kennedy, for example, then the vice president becomes president. Yeah. And so it turns out Calvin Coolidge, this is actually kind of tell you how much the world has changed in 100 years. He was visiting his father in Vermont when when president died. And so they called him by 3 different ways to get the phone to Calvin Coolidge because he's in some remote little community, just like Norway, right? Up in the northern part of the thing. And then his father knocks on the door to tell them that Harding has died. And I think his father, who was a judge or something along those lines, actually administers the oath of office to Calvin Coolidge at 2 a.m. when he gets this message, waking him up to say that he's the next president of the United States. And Calvin Coolidge, there's lots of things about him, but he was a really, really quiet man. And one time he was at a little wedding, at a reception, and a woman comes up to him and she goes, "I bet I can make you, get you to say 3 words." And he goes, "You lost."
Good.
Last question.
The last question. Name 5 countries and capitals in America outside of US, Canada, and Mexico.
Oh, 5 countries in the Americas themselves?
Yeah.
Oh, so like Brazil and Brasilia?
Yes.
Okay. Caracas and Venezuela.
Right.
I think it's Panama City and Panama. I think it's Santiago and Chile.
You're doing
I think
great.
it's Bogota and Colombia.
Excellent.
We are over 5 countries. That's good.
You're an academic neurologist. You better be good at school stuff. my son, so I had one son took the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test this weekend, and I have another son taking the SAT, which is the U.S. college admissions test. So I was studying with him. It keeps you young.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think that is almost the end of the show.
But what is the 3 best or the best advice you give to your clients?
For Parkinson's?
Yeah, the Parkinson patients that comes to your office or what they want to do study.
I tell them, I give them, one, I tell them to avoid these environmental risk factors. 2, I tell them to exercise. So Boss Bloom, you guys probably had, done a ton of work. Others have done a ton of work. Lisa Schulman, others, demonstrating that exercise is beneficial for people with the disease, and vigorous exercise in your 40s, 50s, and 60s may lower your risk of Parkinson's disease by as much as 20%. And then, Parkinson's disease, the best thing they said at the outset is that it's treatable, and that, small doses of levodopa can make a huge difference for people. So if you avoid these environmental risk factors, prevent a further progression of the disease. If you exercise and you got to sweat a little bit, I always say it's better to spend your time without the doctor than with the doctor.
Any kind of exercise? Is everything good just as you exercise?
It seems to be largely independent. It seems things that get your heart rate up and make you sweat enough. So jogging, swimming, yoga, tai chi, ballroom dancing.
Rock steady boxing.
Ballroom dancing, did you say?
I said rock steady boxing.
Rock steady boxing was the next one I was going to say, is another great one.
Right. But seeing that I have Parkinson's disease, and then both Bas Bloom and you say I should stay away from fruit that is sprayed, I should go ecological. One thing is, even though we have generous grants given in Norway, living on disability grant is not a very rich life as it starts out, and the ecological fruit and veggies cost 2 to 3 times the not so ecological.
That's because we're subsidizing the cost of the not ecological ones, right? We're subsidizing it with people like you bearing the burdens of diseases that are caused by other chemicals. If we stop subsidizing the non-ecological ones, I think we'll find the ecological ones will be cheaper.
Yeah.
So that's another point to fight for then.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Good. We have one last question here. The finishing one is, who would you invite for dinner and where?
So
I know you cannot say Dr. Parkinson.
Yeah, no. I thought about this one. And going back to smoking, I never met either of my grandfathers. Both smoked and both died of smoking-related diseases. So I think I'd like to meet both my grandfathers and see what it is. I think we forget about people we don't see. And And if we paid a little more attention to people we don't see, whether the people died from Parkinson's or died from lung cancer, I think we'd make better decisions. And so that's who I'd have lunch with.
That's great.
And where?
So one is from Drennan, West Virginia, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny town outside of the capital, an hour outside the capital. And then my other one is from Baghdad, Iraq. I've been to Drennan. I haven't been to Baghdad, so maybe I'd say Baghdad, Iraq.
Let's go to Baghdad and maybe flies on the wall.
Yeah. Good.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us, Ray.
Thank you, Edgar. Thank you, Sarah Lynn. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Further on.
You.
Thank you.
Good. I think that worked out excellently.
Ja, så ging han vekk. Nei.
Don't struggle with the buttons now. Let's keep Ray on for another minute.
Thank you. I didn't know I was getting this quiz. Work on my geography. But thank you very much. If I can be of help in the future, let me know. And if you send me a link to your podcast, I'll send it out to our distribution list.
Good.
Thank you so
definitely
much.
will. It will be. We will have to juggle around a bit with the publishing scheme, so it will be out next Thursday morning.
Outstanding.
But I will definitely send you the link, and you can work it from there.
Perfect. Outstanding. Edgar, Sarah Lynn, thank you very much for your time and for your interest and for all your service to the Parkinson's community.
You too. Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ja, men det går fint å kjøre dobbelt vignett nå.
Ja, spesielt, for nå snakker vi oppå.
Ja, det er nydelig, for det er ikke rart du kommer med dobbelt vignett, for her var det mye informasjon.
Ja.
For nå skal vi og deg kjøre en liten oppsummering for lytterne, både for de som trenger å recappe, og de som kanskje ikke forstod alt. Og det var veldig sånn, før vi bestemte oss for å gjøre det, så tenkte jeg at det er lurt. Nå etterpå, jeg vet ikke helt hvor mye jeg klarer å huske, og hvor mye vi klarer å recappe, men vi får jo gjøre en liten sånn kort oppsummert da.
Vi får gjøre en kort oppsummert. Hovedmantra hans var jo at det er forurensning, forurensning, forurensning. Kjemikalier, 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 som utløser Parkinson, som han sa, tilbake til 1800-tallet, da Dr. Parkinson så disse 6 første pasientene som han beskrev, med shaking og det hele. Så hadde den industrielle revolusjonen pågått i rundt 100 år.
Ja.
I England da, med nettopp det. Veldig mye dritt rett ut i lufta, som man jo gjorde tidligere. Man bare skylte ut i vannet, skylte ut i grunnvannet, og ut i lufta.
Ja, og der begynte han å se selvfølgelig ikke med en gang, som han sa, for det tar jo tid å utvikle sykdom.
Ja.
Men at han har sett en økning av Parkinson i de landene som ikke hadde pollution før, altså forurensning før.
Ja.
Og har fått en økning på Parkinson med at vi nå slipper ut alt for mye.
Og han lenket det direkte til, eller han sammenlignet, rettere sagt, med lungekreft.
Ja, for 100 år siden hadde vi ikke lungekreft.
Nei.
Og så viser det seg 25 år etter med røyking. Så
var det en voldsom peak på lungekreft. Og tilsvarende etter alle de tiltakene som er gjort nå i en lang rekke, i hvert fall vestlige land, hvor man jo har fått holdt på å si norsk røykelov. Det er ikke bare i Norge vi har det. Det er jo en lang rekke land etter hvert som har veldig strenge restriksjoner på røyking.
Og fokus på oppmerksomhet og informasjon.
Riktig.
Angående hva røyken gjør, ikke minst.
Riktig. Så har lungekreft nå gått kraftig tilbake.
Og en har medisin.
Nemlig.
samme som man da sammenligner med HIV, som det ikke var medisin for, at du døde av, mens nå lever du med på grunn av at noen var loud. Noen samlet seg og var et ansikt utad, fikk oppmerksomhet og klarte å lage ting som gjorde at en nå har medisiner som holder de sjakk.
Og som gjør at det går an å omgås mennesker, pasienter med HIV. De første årene, husker jeg, så var det jo helt baluba. Man ville ikke ta i det med naboens et eller annet. Nei,
en var jo livredd. Og en trodde jo en ble smittet ved å gå forbi.
Riktig.
Så har vi jo lært gjennom informasjon. Og budskapet her er jo, jeg synes det var 2 ting som det er jo denne arven han snakker om å bringe videre til neste generasjon, at den forskningen og det vi gjør nå, eller alle de som jobber hardt for Parkinson, kan da gjøre en forskjell i fremtiden. Og at den dødelige sykdom før, eller sykdom som vi ikke kunne så mye om, har da blitt til at nå kan du leve med det. Og det har kommet medisin, og det synes jeg jo er veldig fint.
Så og som han sa at vi skal være klar over at den forurensningen den ikke bare er i luften, men den siver ned i grunnvannet, hvorfra den igjen fordamper opp gjennom husene vi bor i, som ikke er pottetette i det hele tatt. Og dette forplanter seg altså rundt og rundt. Og jeg utfordret ham jo litt på dette med, for han var gjentatte ganger innom renseribransjen, som tidligere har brukt en kjemikalie som heter trichloroethylin, tror jeg er det engelske ordet, som jeg vet ikke hva den heter på norsk, men forkortes av TCE. Og hvor han sa at det faktisk nå er renseri som har en sånn et grønt blad i logoen sin, eller som et sånt merke tilsvarende vår svanemerking, eller hvor du sier at dette renseriet bruker ikke det kjemikaliet. De klarer å rense klærne dine med andre kjemikalier som ikke er så skadelige i det hele tatt.
Og heldigvis er jo ikke det største problemet vi har i Norge. For det har i hvert fall ikke jeg råd å levere skjorten mine inn på.
Akkurat.
Så det er ikke renseriene vi tror vi skal rope lau til. Jeg tror det er andre grupper, men det å ha litt mer fokus, eller sånn inspirasjon til dere lyttere da, at det er noe kanskje å lese seg opp på og sjekke ut. Vi kan jo ikke påstå noen ting som helst, meg og deg.
Nei, det kan vi ikke.
Men med informasjon, kunnskap er makt, og det er jo mer kunnskap vi får oss å skaffe oss om denne sykdommen og hva som kan påvirke, spesielt når han sa det ikke lå genetisk eller arvelige disposisjoner til det.
Nemlig.
Og sånn som jeg også nevnte til han, at det er ikke arvelige disposisjoner i vår familie til Alzheimer eller Parkinson. Og både mor og far, heldigvis bodde de i det huset etter meg og bror hadde flyttet ut. Sånn at vi var ikke der så mye, men den teorien hans da kan jo stemme i forhold til de to, for det har vist seg at den jorden de bor på, i det Stavanger, lite stykke ut forbi, ikke mye forurensning i luften, men det er et gammelt industriområde hvor det ble bygd opp et nytt nabolag.
Riktig.
Og der er det flere krefttilfeller også. Av de som har bodd der. Sånn at skal ikke påstå noe, men det kan være noe i det.
Og så sa han jo en ting, og det var å trene intensivt.
Det har vi jo hatt flere som har vært innom her og snakket om, og så det tror jeg vi må bare ta på alvor.
Og det var også byen jo før jo heller. Og som han sa, det bør være trening som er såpass at du svetter litt i hvert fall. Breaking a sweat, som det heter på engelsk.
Men husker du hva det siste rådet hans var? Han hadde 3. Men det var vel det første da var, så pollution, og så var det og så...
Og så var det jo dette med økologisk mat.
Hva du spiste.
Så... Og det var jo også en kraftfull påstand fra ham, for jeg utfordret ham igjen og sa at men, det er fint alt det der med økologisk mat, men det koster jo 2 til 3 ganger av ikke fullt så økologisk. Og sånn at det er jo fordi vi subsidierer det ikke-økologiske.
Riktig.
Og hvis vi tar bort subsidiene derfra, så vil det antagelig koste omtrent det samme som økologisk, som vil gjøre at... Det der ett fett, det vil si det smarte valget, av ett fett jo da å kjøpe økologisk. Og vaske frukten, vaske grønnsakene vi spiser grundig før vi tar dem inn i matlagingen. Ja.
Det var kort oppsummert, og jeg håper dere lyttere har fått med dere enda mer enn det vi oppsummerte, og hvis ikke så det så fint med podcast, for du kan bare høre det en gang til.
Og en gang til.
Og en gang til.
Og en gang til.
Yes.
Og så det jo slik at jeg 4 forfattere av denne boken Ending Parkinson's-disease, som kom ut i 2021, som man sa, rett før pandemien. Men det var altså 4 forfattere til sammen, nederlandske Bas Bloom og 3 amerikanere da. Og de 3 andre, altså 2 gjenværende amerikanere, Michael O'Coon, Todd Scherer og nederlandske Bas Bloom vil dukke opp i podcasten her utover høsten, cirka 1 gang i måneden. Så det bare å henge med.
Så da avslutter jeg med en halvveis kransekakevits. Og det da, siden vi var innom Kina og forurensning, vet du hva han fattigste mann i Kina heter?
Ja, den jo gammel som hevna, det Tom Peng Pong-greiene, den ikke morsom lenger.
Det en kjempeløgn.
Nå trodde jeg faktisk du hadde en ny en oppi ermet.
Det ikke alle som har hørt den. Dessuten så skal jo har du ikke lært deg dette ennå? Du skal svare nei.
Ja, nei, og så skal
det var ikke en quiz. Og så må du legge litt sånn tom, bang, bong.
Ja. Og før du vet ordet, så blir kinesisk ambassaden på nakken her, sånn med et eller annet, og utenriksministeren blir kalt inn på tepp og hva for noe, for at vi sitter og lager quiz med
nei, fordi det var kransekakevits, men kan ikke bli det.
Nei, akkurat. Fint, da sier vi takk for oss, og på hjertelig gjenhør i neste uke igjen. Eller, hvis du savner oss fælt, og det håper vi du gjør, så det jo bare å gå tilbake i arkivet og gå tilbake til en av de 115-16 tidligere episodene som ligger der og godgjør seg, og bare venter på deg. Og det var alt vi hadde i denne episoden av podcasten Uttafor, men Innafor, levert av Parkinson-foreningen i Oslo Akershus, med programlederne Serilin Ærelandsen og Edgar Waldmanis.